It is common in economics classes to model the minimum wage as a price floor in a perfectly competitive market. What we then get is that as soon as we set the minimum wage above the market wage level, we will create unemployment because firms won't want to hire as many workers. All we will have achieved is to hurt the very people we are trying to help. The problem with that analysis is that it assumes we're starting out from a perfectly competitive market, and in the real world, that assumption is unlikely to hold. What we'll show in this video is that in actual labor markets, the prevailing wage will tend to be below the competitive level, which means an increase in the minimum wage can lead to the creation of more, not fewer jobs. But let's back up. We'll first build the model piece by piece. Let's consider the labor market for retail workers in a small city. Workers will make up the supply side and employers the demand side. The supply curve tells us how many people are willing to sign up to work, and the demand side tells us how many workers employers are willing to hire at any given wage. We can also view these from the inverse perspective as telling us how the wage varies with the level of employment. Let's use some example functions. This supply function, taken at face value, says that the first worker is willing to work for as little as $3 an hour. When Q equals 1,000 workers, the next worker would demand $13 an hour. When Q equals 2,000 workers, the next one would demand $23 an hour, and so on. Along the demand curve, price and quantity move in opposite directions. This function gives us the marginal benefit created by each additional worker. It says that the first worker creates $24 worth of value for their employer, but as more workers are employed, their marginal contribution will be lower and lower, so when 1,000 workers have already been hired, the next one will only create $19 worth of value, and so on. Now let's look at what will happen. If there are many retail shops, then each will account for only a small slice of the market and will make decisions based on the conditions they face. They will post a job opening whenever the marginal benefit they expect to get from that next worker exceeds the current market wage. Workers in turn will apply for a job as long as the going wage is at least as great as their reservation wage. In equilibrium, the number of job applicants and job openings have to match, so we will arrive at the intersection of these two curves, and market wage will have to equal 17. Suppose the wage was below 17, say 13, then there would be 2,200 job openings but 1,000 applicants. There would be a firm that stands to gain $19 per hour if they hire one more worker, and so they will be then willing to pay more than $13. So the wage would go up. So far, so good. But what if all these jobs are under one employer? Suppose again that the wage was $13 per hour. At this level, the firm is able to employ 1,000 workers, but they would stand to gain $19 of value or almost that from the next worker. So they'll offer a higher wage, right? Just 1 cent more would bring the 1,001st worker on board, and that would be a net gain of almost $6. But here's the rub. Now it's the same firm that's employing the first 1,000 workers too, and when they increase their wage, they have to pay everyone more. 1 extra cent for 1,000 workers means their costs of labor increase by $10. So overall, this is now a bad proposition for them. In fact, they won't even want to pay $13. When deciding how many workers to hire, the employer will compare its marginal benefit, so extra gains from each additional worker, to its marginal expenditure, the increase in its total cost of labor from hiring one more worker. We can show mathematically that this marginal expenditure function is going to rise twice as fast as the supply curve, and so it's going to intersect marginal benefit at much smaller quantity. In this particular example, the level of employment that maximizes the employer's profits will be 840 workers, and the wage will be $11.40 an hour. But hang on, won't there be a mismatch now between the number of jobs available and the number of job applicants? Yes, at that wage, the employer would like to hire a lot more people than are willing to take the job. So they will have many unfilled openings and perhaps even complain that people don't seem to want to work, but they won't want to do the obvious, and that is pay people a wage that's closer to the value they create. This is an example of a monopsony market, a market with a single buyer. The result is what you'll get anytime you have a market concentrated on the demand side. The price will be below the competitive level, the quantity will also be below the competitive level, and there will be deadweight loss. Relative to the competitive situation, you can also see that workers are getting much lower surplus. So what can we do about it? We could introduce a price floor. That's what the minimum wage is. In this example, if we set the minimum wage at 15, employment will increase because more people will be available to work. So even though the number of listed jobs is reduced, the number of employed workers increases because the binding constraint was that the jobs were just undesirable at that low of a wage. Of course, there's a limit. If the minimum wage exceeds the competitive level, it will begin to create unemployment. But note that even in this range, it's possible that the minimum wage has increased the number of jobs as compared to the case where there was no intervention. Another possible intervention is a job guarantee. A job guarantee gives workers an alternative, so they would no longer be willing to work at a wage below the one offered by the public sector. Employers will need to at least match this wage in order to be able to attract workers. And so if they were exercising market power, then the number of employees they hire may go up. The effect will be very similar to the effect of the minimum wage.